Well, this week we've demolished the age-old Kenyan proverb. Let's wait for the Supreme Court ruling. This is Afro-Political. All right, so this is two guys, two mics, two taskers, RJ Isba. Loads to talk about this week, including the Supreme Court ruling, loads and loads of subtopic in there. I'm James Smart.
Marvin Tumbo.
Welcome to Afro-Political. The age-old proverb that has been demolished. Finally, the Supreme Court ruling is here. In total, 178 pages, all through.
No,
The dissenting is 440 pages.
plus 91.
Plus 91. So there are a lot of dissenters who have a lot of to say, but the guys who are saying the truth, as it were, of why they nullified the election had only 178 pages. But it's finally here.
It's because there are no case.
How do you so? What do you mean there was no case?
Okay, carry on.
All right, Marvin is still in denial. But let's start off with the question on why we're waiting for this ruling and waiting for that detailed judgment. The thing is, we finally have certain reasons as to why this President Uhuru Kenyatta's election was void, if you like, or nullified. And I think the biggest takeaway for me and vis-a-vis 2013 is this, that for this Supreme Court ruling, for this Supreme Court, they said that it's important to look at the laws and the Constitution first before you look at the question of numbers. Because the process, as we had rightly said, the process does matter. And their ruling was very strong on this point. And they went on about, how they could not get into the question of numbers. And also some respect. Talk about how IEBC, in fact, misunderstood the petition. IEBC did not respond to the petitioner's exact questions. They went and started talking about numbers, and the petitioner was actually questioning the process. And I think that's the first big disconnect. If you look at first the ruling, what did you pick out as the first disconnect?
I think if you're going to talk about elections, and when you deal with matters of, you cannot have a situation where the court relies on a process solely, throwing out a case of numbers, because at the end of the day, the two are married. And if the process was a problem, no one contested the votes in the ballot.
Because there was no point to contest the votes in the ballot.
Okay.
If the process was so mad with irregularities and illegalities, but there was no point about talking about the numbers.
Everybody, all parties said what is in the boxes is okay. The issue was...
No, they didn't say that. They didn't say that. The petitioner did not even talk about the numbers.
Yeah, because they lost.
No, but you see now, we have to talk about the ruling, Marvin. See now, we're bringing the political angle into this, which is
The
fine.
ruling is political.
We'll talk about the political angle. But we'll talk about the ruling, all right? The petitioner's case had nothing to do with the numbers. The petitioner's case was very simple.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And okay, that one I'll see. Yeah. IBC messed up. They did not respond based on the process. They responded to a qualitative case with a quantitative response.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one I'll see. Yeah. That's IBC's problem.
Yes.
Now, in as far as the ruling goes, I don't think there's anything new they added. Of course, it's more
detailed.
It's more detailed,
right?
Yeah. But the things I was expecting to see.
What did you not see that you would have wanted to see? And especially, let's about the majority ruling. What do you expect to see that you didn't see?
If you say there are irregularities and illegalities committed, there's also the issue of culpability.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, without express instructions on who was criminally negligible, criminally liable.
Right.
Yeah. Without without express instructions about criminal liability, and to say that IEBC conducted this. If you say there's an illegality, someone committed those illegalities.
Yes.
So who is this? Yeah. And to what extent now? Because at the end of the day, if you have now NASA complaining and saying we cannot work with this IEBC based on the Supreme Court ruling, then that Supreme Court, the onus was on them to be able to define how this IEBC functions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they did not do that. They said there's no criminal liability.
I would say that is half true, but from where I sit, I see it this way. A couple of things happen here. One, this is more of a constitutional court, right? The Supreme Court and any court, you not approach any court, and if they cannot give you an actionable request, a court should not be able to move, or a court cannot move. All right.
Okay.
So, for instance, I cannot move to the labor court to ask for a constitutional interpretation of a certain matter. They will send me to a constitutional court. Okay, because any orders I get from a labor court will not be able to be served
fair
anywhere.
enough.
All right. So, from that perspective, my view is that the Supreme Court is a constitutional court and not a criminal court, and as such, it's in 14 days they were unable to investigate the individuals. All right. And any orders that they would have given to say, you know what, we feel that certain individuals should be either arrested or found criminal culpable, whatever it is, I think that would have been in vain. All right.
But
that is one.
No, the issue is that if you are not looking at if they are not a criminal court,
Yeah.
then also they should not have absolved the IEBC.
I don't think they did.
They absolved them of criminal
they-
liability.
They have, my understanding is this, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we'll see it as the days goes by.
Yeah.
I think that they said IBC as an institution is fine and it's okay. But then they went in so much length and breadth to talk about the illegalities and irregularities. And I'll give you an example. For instance, the question of forms not bearing security features. All right? The single question on that is this, that you have an institution that, and persons and people, all right? Someone who's charged to say and swears an affidavit to a court of law and says that all these forms, the forms that we have, they all bear security features, certain security features, and swear an affidavit and puts it in a court of law. And the Supreme Court does its own investigation and somehow finds out that they did not. All these forms do not have security features. The court does not have to go further by saying we've indicted this person. There is a process. IBC was supposed to conduct certain responsibilities, and in that question they failed. So they've pointed out there is a failure on IBC, and there was someone who was in charge. And
It's
in
criminal
IBC
negligence.
Exactly. Now that is for another court to move and say that these are taxpayers' money, because we have to tie down this to a point of taxpayers have paid for this process. Okay. If you steal taxpayers' money, all right, there's obviously a criminal negligence. Now, we are subjecting taxpayers to another 10 billion plus of resources to do another election, all right? Someone has to explain to this country what happened to the money in the beginning. So I don't think that the whole process was just down the water. They say that IBC as an institution has to conduct the next election.
Yes.
All right? But there are processes that were botched, clearly botched, by individuals in IBC. All right? Now, those individuals, it's upon another court to move forward and find those people criminally culpable. That's the point. All right?
Okay.
Now, just today, NASA has moved to the DPP, as I thought that should have been their right move, and ask for, certain individuals, and I think they've named 6 individuals, Chairman Chebukati and CEO Chiloba, among others, to be investigated by the DPP. I think that's the right way.
Okay.
Now we have to wait and see if the DPP says how long it will take to investigate, because the DPP will have to take the file and take it to the CID investigate and say, if there were this person.
The DPP has been given 72 hours.
I think that is wrong. I think it's very clear and expressed that the office of the DPP is a constitutional office. You cannot give it. You cannot, in many ways, I think, instruct it. No one should be able to instruct it. So I think that's a political ploy by NASA, in my view. But I think their move to the office of the DPP is the right move, because it will help us to clear the doubt as to whether whatever the Supreme Court said was just null and void, that it just didn't matter at the end of the day.
The issue, I think, and the biggest issue for now is how will this election be conducted with all this talk around removal of staff, yeah, and in my summation, I think it's a matter of trying to postpone or trying to avoid the election or create a situation where the election will not happen, and which I think is what even forced the Attorney General to come out and say, hey, there's no room for a Nusum Kata government.
Marvin, you're really playing in the political angle today.
I'm not.
You're just running to the political angle today. Here's the thing. Let me say, I mean, God rest his soul in peace. Chris Msando was, well, as soon as we knew he had died on that Monday, by evening there was a replacement for him. All right. He was a key clog in the IBC system. All right. He was the IC director. He knew how the system was run.
He was the
left,
deputy
right,
IC
center,
director.
right? Deputy IC director, but he was in charge of the system, right?
Okay.
But as soon as he died, by evening we had a replacement for him. So I don't think it's feasible for anyone to say that, or it's right for anyone to say that by certain staff being either kicked out or being investigated, that it would somehow delay the election. I think that's just a big excuse.
So you remove Chebukati and then what?
No, Chebukati is a big, that's another question. But I think for the staff starting
And-
from the CEO,
And
I think each and any one of them
don't
can
they
remove.
deserve their day in court?
They do.
Yes,
They do.
And if they do deserve their day in court, why don't we wait until such a point? Yeah, because you cannot right now. Everything is just it's baseless accusations.
No, it's not.
Because-
It's not
no.
Marvin. Someone, you cannot say it's a baseless accusation. The Supreme Court, the highest court in land. I have to bring you back to this point because you're really
Okay.
playing in the political gallery today. I have to bring you back to the point that the Supreme Court, the highest court in land, has said there are illegalities and irregularities with the election, and this election was conducted
Okay,
by
now,
individuals.
Now, here's the thing. Yeah, we were discussing earlier, and we are saying at the end of the day, for me, the threshold of this Supreme Court ruling was this low. Yeah,
if I remember correctly, again to the dissenting judge, which I urged you earlier on in our program
Yes.
to please find time and read 440 pages. She said that court had placed the threshold for nullifying an election to be this high.
yes,
Okay. Because because you're talking about so many laws, and you're asking IBC to follow those laws, right? And not to deviate. And if they deviate in any of the laws on the Constitution, that is grounds enough to nullify an
Nullify.
election.
Uh-huh.
All right?
Yes.
Those are very high grounds.
yes.
All right? It's very high grounds. Remember,
But at
Marvin,
the end of the
remember,
day, no, look, something has to give, because right now you have your supporters. Yeah, let's say
I don't have any supporters.
let's say
I mean, I have
no,
Twitter followers and Facebook followers.
Hypothetical situation. Your Twitter followers are voting for you. Yeah.
I think I
And-
could. All right, just go on.
Hypothetical situation. Yeah. If you are able, or if you are in a position to influence, or you get supporters, guys who are actually, you get some of your supporters to become agents.
Yeah.
Yeah. To become IEBC agents, to become IEBC returning officers, and whatnot.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, based on this Supreme Court ruling, what it means is you can have a manufactured sabotage. Yeah. You have a manufactured sabotage by telling your returning officers, don't hand over this paper. Do not stamp the back of the papers. Yeah.
Right.
So that now, at the point where they do that, and these
And you can
papers-
move to court and have the entire process
you
nullified.
Exactly, you can
I
kill
get-
the entire process.
I get the
now,
point.
for me, if the parties at hand do not want the elections to be to stand, and the Supreme Court has said, based on not stamping the back of a paper is grounds for nullification.
But it's
the
not,
only thing
it's
you
not
need.
just that,
then-
Marvin.
No,
it's not
but
just that, Marvin.
here's the
That
thing.
and many other grounds.
No, but
You see,
here's the
I
thing.
think it's a bit dishonest to tell the people that the Supreme Court nullified election because the forms were not stamped in the back.
That's part of the security
it's
feature.
Part of the security
Exactly.
feature. So
And-
it's a process. Process, Marvin.
No, but here's the thing, yeah. If you have now, and which is my problem, at the end of the day, if someone can compromise, you have 40,000 voters.
Yeah.
You have 40,000 polling stations.
Right.
Yeah. You have probably 10 times the number.
Right.
In terms of not 10, yeah, 10 times the number in terms of the personnel, the staff.
Yeah.
That being the case, these parties, and consider IBC staff, they are also voters. They support political parties, they support political players. And if the onus is on them, or if they are given instructions or they are told it would help our candidate if you don't stamp or if you do this, you can easily be able to compromise. Out of the 400,000 maybe staff, you can compromise 1,000. That 1,000 will make its way to court, and the court will say nullify this. But that's a manufactured problem. That's my concern.
Marvin, I'll have to.
If you have the threshold that low,
we have to we have to end this with a very simple point, and this is what Johan Kriegler, the person who we called a senior judge for South Africa, we called in this country to investigate the 2007 debacle, right? And he said in his own words that you cannot conduct an honest process in a dishonest environment.
Yes.
I think this country has a far much bigger problem, all right? We need to start looking into ourselves more, into the human interaction of what we do, because we cannot say that it's impossible to have elections in this country. And also we cannot say that we can have elections which are mad with illegalities and irregularities, and as long as they're just, 1,000, 10,000, it's fine. We cannot say that. But let's move on to the next point. Let's move on to the next point. It is a process. This program is a process. Great. Now let's move to the next point. And staying with that supreme judgment, and it's the dissenting opinion. And on this point, I'll cede ground to Marvin. Because I read the majority judgment, but Marvin read the 440 pages of very well reasoned.
Why are you gonna throw someone under the bus like that?
Under the SGR. So, what do you thought about the dissenting opinions?
I haven't read 440 pages yet.
Yes.
It's gonna take a minute. It took the good judge herself a couple of hours just to
4 hours to be exact.
Yes.
Right.
To run us through that. But it's the same argument I was making. Yeah. My biggest concern is that the threshold for nullifying an election was ideally it should be this high, but this court saw it fit to drop it to some level that is a bit ridiculous, if you ask me, because at the end of the day, there's gonna be someone can compromise the system, yeah. And as I've said, it's pretty easy to do it. At the end of the day, when IEBC is hiring people, and which is something we discussed yesterday, it's very easy to front your people. It's very easy to front your supporters, which means also to be able to compromise the process.
Yeah,
can be child's play to politicians, and this is just at a polling station level, where you just need to tell guys, look, don't stamp the whatever, don't do this, tell your agents not to sign. When you tell a returning officer who is supporting you not to sign, and this was actually, it happened in quite a number of cases. Now, when that becomes, when the court, and which is why lawyers usually ask for judicial restraint, is to be able to say that whatever these numbers are, they were not significant enough to affect the results.
Okay.
Now, for me, based on the deciding arguments from Njoki herself and from Ojwang, they argued that the evidence put forward was not sufficient. It was all over the place, and it was full of generalities. There were no specifics. And that being the case, why are we here?
All right. My view is this, that I see it slightly different. I see that the court raised the bar of elections in this country owing to that very simple fact that elections in this country can be a very divisive factor. In 2007, more than 1,000 people were killed on the account of an election. All right, close to 500,000 or something were rendered homeless, and I think that situation is still being resolved. up to now. And in successive elections since 1992, 97, we've always had, someone somewhere being killed because of an election.
Okay.
This one was no different. All right. Now, that being the case, we are in a very peculiar situation whereby we have the process that we have in these elections of making sure that we have polling streams, polling stations, polling centers, polling stations, and then finally making sure that we put all that into a constituency and then sending them over. We've put an elaborate process so that we make it almost impossible for the will of the people to be overturned by certain individuals,
including the Supreme Court.
All right? Who can connive. No, those are not certain individuals. Again, the Supreme Court.
I'm joking.
The Supreme Court. No. It's very serious. The Supreme Court is an organ and a function of the will of the people.
Yes.
All right? So we have to respect it. The same way we have to respect the presidency.
We respected the Supreme Court and its ruling. And no, you don't have to agree with it.
I agree, but you see, this is the thing. The difference I see 2013 and 2017, and my view of how I think we are getting into a very polarized and grounds whereby we are almost removing powers from the Constitution. And if you're not careful enough, that will make this Constitution to be so weak that at some point it will not be enough to fight for us.
Who has removed powers?
Here's the thing. That the 2013 Supreme Court ruled, again when it was called upon, to look at the question of Uhuru Kenyatta in his election against then Prime Minister. And in its wisdom, it ruled that Uhuru Kenyatta was validly elected. All right? Despite the protestation that the Prime Minister had then, because he was in office, he agreed and said accept and move on. And he left out. He didn't agree with the Supreme Court. He said, I have questions with the Supreme Court. And the throwing out, I think, then was his 900-page, evidence or whatever it is. And if you look at the world over, for the last 4.5 years, this question of the Supreme Court, that ruling, has been criticized largely because of the technicalities. A big court bound itself in technicalities. All right. But you see, he had qualms with it and said, no, what? I'll deal it with it politically elsewhere, and left it. And Uhuru Kenyatta had to be president, and there's nothing after that. All right. Now, this time, the same Supreme Court was called upon and nullified the election of Uhuru Kenyatta. It so happens that this still the same players, all right, now on different sides. I think the reaction to it has to be measured. Okay, I think you can disagree with the Supreme Court. I think you can disagree with certain judges and judgments. I'm still of the view that every judge, the way they read all the judgments, they should have done that. Okay. Because what that does, it gives us a clarity of purpose. All right, and for us to start picking out what somehow how this judge thinks differently from the other and the other and the other. We didn't have that. We didn't have that benefit in 2013. And I think that removed so much from the ruling of 2013. Because 2013, if you had a minority view, would have perhaps managed to say, you know what, maybe the Supreme Court was wrong because this judge said you guys are all clowns, and whatever it is. So this time we have one judge who clearly disrespected the other judges and called them names and used political buzzwords in her entire 4 hours. But that is fine. Be as it may. But my point is I think we should be to a point whereby we disagree with respect and say it is fine. Let's move on from where we are. But we cannot be going back to a point where we're saying, what, each and every single judge has to account for himself. We can't go back to that place. It's already done and dusted. Let's move back to politics. Let's do an election.
It's what makes you think that's not political fodder?
For who?
Here's the thing, and it's something I keep saying as well. If you're going to have a situation where your presidency has been nullified, the most natural reaction is anger. Yeah? And for your supporters, they must see also that you are angry and you're disappointed at their votes having not counted. Their will, the supreme will of the people, who supported you, having not counted. So that anger should be there, and it's understandable, and it's perfectly...
Where does it end?
Yeah?
When does it end? Because, I mean...
It ends with the re-election.
The line for me is very quick, that we have a very thin line between going outrightly and disobeying the Constitution and making it impossible for any other arm of government to discharge its duty.
Who has disobeyed the Constitution?
No, I'm saying, but when we move forward, I mean, I see now we're going to the courts and saying, okay, no, we need to amend Section 83. We need to amend this. We need to remove all the powers from the Supreme Court. We have all these discussions that are going on, all right, from the party that is portraying its anger. I understand the anger and the difference, but when does it end? Let's move to the next point, which is the election date. We thought we were going to have 17th, but then it's moved 26th. Otimofo, the company that provided servers to IEBC and the Kim's kit, has had a very interesting 2 weeks. First, they said they had conducted their own sort of in-house investigations and found nothing wrong. They gave themselves a clean bill of health. Then they came back and said, by the way, the 17th doesn't work for us because we need to upgrade our system. Again, that doesn't make a lot of sense because supposing no one had gotten 50 plus 1, we were supposed to go to a 30-day re-election, all right? And then they wouldn't have the time to do the research. I dismiss that to be another reason that is here and there. But just yesterday and the day before yesterday, they come out and say a few things are happening here. One, we've asked the IBC twice for an external audit. IBC has just gone radio silence. And they're just somewhere there in the middle. But IBC has moved the date to 26, which is an interesting date. I'm sure Marvin is going to tell us why. But do you really see these elections happening on 26th?
Elections must happen. 26th, I think they'll happen. And being the president's birthday,
he couldn't stop himself. Please. please.
Being the president's birthday,
Yeah.
I think people know what gift to give him.
Some would suggest a good gift for your
Is a
birthday
vote.
is you going home to your house, to your home where you belong. That's a very good birthday gift.
After winning, yes. After winning.
But seriously though, I think that IBC has several problems from where I sit. That they have to look at this judgment from the Supreme Court.
I think that's why they postponed the...
Yes, to a week at least, because ideally, and I think I told you this from the first time we spoke about the election date, IBC needs all the time that it's given for them to conduct a process that is both credible, all right? They would need the time to make sure that the staff that they have, if anyone has questions about the staff, the POs and the returning officers and everyone that they hired, they have all these things to think about, all right? And my view is that they need all the time. So I was quite, I would say, ambivalent with the 17th because it was too casual, all right? It didn't take into account the preparations and the lead time that they needed. And now they have this question of OT and MOFO to sort out. They have questions of the staff and the Supreme Court saying, well, you have to conduct it in accordance with the law, strict accordance with the law, both constitution and the election laws, which are very strict, in all honesty. So they needed the time. I'm not sure they're going to pull it off because I think that first, they have not been so resolute, in my view, in terms of them wanting to do this election in certain ways. That's my view. And I hope that moving forward, they can show that resoluteness in the 30 or so days that remains.
I don't think they have a choice. Yeah, if the elections were annulled and there's a reason for annulment that has been spelled out by the Supreme Court, I think for me the way forward is quite clear. Yeah, it's you go through the ruling, you see where they said you've had issues, and following that say, okay, how do we clear this? What do we need to change?
Right.
How do we need to change?
Right.
Within reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, to be honest, I think they have the capacity to be able to do this. I don't think
I have no question.
the only problem. The only problem with regard to the date is a political problem, not an IBC problem.
It's true, but that's the thing. I mean, if you are Raila Odinga and NASA, there are certain things that you look forward in this date. One, you are looking at that Supreme Court as well and the ruling and saying, picking out certain issues that you felt the Supreme Court was so that were very clear about. All right, or the questions of illegalities and several questions like the polling stations which were not gazetted, or the forms that were not delivered. 10,000 plus, and the security of the forms. Certain things. So if you're him and NASA, you're picking out these issues, and you are seeking IEBC's in my view, attention and saying that, this, I need guarantees that these things will not happen, or there's no chance for these things to happen again if I were him. All right. Because at the end of the day, I think elections for me are this, that a situation whereby you have an arbiter and a playing field that is equal. That any party, given the same set of circumstances, wins by the strategy they've put, not by the ability to move the goalposts. All right? And I think if we are, in the next few weeks, if we are very clear that IBC and Chebukati, whoever it is, are very resolute and put all the parameters of how this election is going to be run, and say we've read the Supreme Court ruling and we figured out that A, B, C, D are the problems that the Supreme Court had highlighted, and this is how we plan to fix it, and on the election day, this is how things are going to run, I think there should be no doubt that we'll have the elections on the 26th, and they will run smoothly. But however, I fear that is not the case. So again, I take back my words.
As I said, this is a political problem, and which is why you find NASA trying to do this list called irreducible minimums. Yeah. Now, what that does is to try and basically just call the shots. Yeah. The Supreme Court, they're trying to dictate the terms.
So is Jubilee.
No, it's
a political process, right?
It needs to be forcing the institution to change, yeah, or to do what exactly you're saying. That's how is our fair play, yeah. But that's said,
I was going to answer, but I'll keep quiet.
Having said that, yeah, I think given what the Supreme Court has said, and given what we need to be aligned, yeah. If the IEBC, as you rightly said, stick to the law, to the constitution and to the electoral laws as stipulated, yeah, then it means NASA has grounds to go back to the same court after these elections to say, based on your ruling, you said this.
Yeah.
Based on the elections we've had, this is what happened. So nullify these elections again.
And they'll do it again. They'll do it again. Right.
Which is why I'm saying
we must run to the law, because it's very clear. If IEBC were just to do what is in the law, which is Form 34As be accompanied by, the text and the exact form, all right, to the servers and at bombers, because that didn't happen, all right. If that were to happen first, I don't think the question of process even begins, because this election is a process, all right. Now IEBC, when it failed to do that, they started digging up a hole. So if they can technologically, and this is why the Supreme Court came with a question of complementarity, that you must make a system that is, first, it's very easy for you to verify and make sure that it's free and fair and verifiable. Those are tenets that are in the Constitution, and it's very easy for IEBC to do that. The problem is, I think that they introduced a lot of, their own version of or interpretation of what they thought the law was, and that is what I think that did them in. That's my view. So if they put just, say what, if we have all 40,883 forms come into this server and displayed by this, at this time, on this screen, then wait a few minutes or a few hours, they all transport the physical forms to the constituency, and the returning officer there takes them, fills them up, transmits Form 34B. I don't think you have grounds to talk about process anymore.
And which is why I'm saying the elections will happen. Because if I don't see any drastic changes, the Supreme Court did not create new sets of laws.
Of course not. Yeah.
For IEBC to follow. So it's just for IEBC to say, now, this is where we
just need the IEBC to follow the law. Fair and simple. Finally, Attorney General Githu Muigai, today, unprompted, from nowhere, comes to say a few things. One, Uhuru Kenyatta is the president until another president is sworn into office.
Yes.
I didn't know that was on contention until he came about and said it. Then he goes about and said, what? If we don't have an election within 60 days, he still remains the president. again, I didn't know there's possibility of us not having an elections within 60 days. So Marvin, what gives? Educate me. No. I take you to be quite a clever person, you know. And
Thank you.
So please.
Number one, there has been talk of a caretaker government, yeah?
Right.
And that is owing to the political kind of mood or interpretation around guys not wanting the elections to happen. Because the interpretation of guys saying these are our irreducible minimums.
Yes.
And then also the case that guys where NASA is saying there's not going to be an election.
Right.
Yeah. Saying there's not going to be an election unless, yeah.
Yeah.
It was first we are going to boycott, and then from the boycotting it was there will not be elections. Now, when people start talking about that, the next thing that starts worrying you is, are we entering into a constitutional crisis? So the AG, yeah, in his position,
abundance of wisdom,
felt it right to clarify the position, because this narrative has been going on. When you go online, when the guys are talking about a possible constitutional crisis, but now he had to explain that there will not be a constitutional crisis because the law does not provide for a caretaker government. Number one, and number two, the country will always have a president. The only issue,
the law doesn't provide for a lot of things, right? The law doesn't provide for this show, you know, for political, right? But the show is happening. So be as it may, here's my problem with the whole interpretation or whatever. I think it's a political ploy and a political play. All right, NASA, there will be an election. There has to be an election.
Yes.
There will be an election for whatever it is.
Yeah.
And whether in 60 days, within those 60 days, we have that election or not, there is a government and there's a country to run.
Yes.
All right. That has never been in doubt.
Yes.
So to play into the political gallery, if you like, all right, to buttress these buzzwords, which have been something that I want to accuse so many people of, but I would really stay clear because I'm a good person.
Mm-hmm.
All right? It is not only it's absolutely wrong. I think it's raising the political temperatures. It is playing into the propaganda gallery and playing into things that are neither here nor there. Where would NASA push for a caretaker government? At what point would they do that?
Because they are losing.
Marvin, you don't know that.
I know that.
You don't know that, Marvin.
I know that.
If you have to argue on science and reason, you know, you cannot backslide and start arguing on propaganda and tweets and Facebook.
Here's the thing. At the end of the day, if the numbers do not favor you politically, yeah? If the numbers don't favor you politically, the one thing you'd want to do is keep throwing things, yeah? You keep, and this is just one more.
All right.
And who has introduced this issue of there not be elections? But it wasn't Gidu.
But from where? Gidu is the Attorney General.
Yeah.
He's the Attorney General.
What is he speaking to? He is speaking on the law.
He's an advisor to the government. Because I think we're confusing a few things here. A Jubilee lawyer and Attorney General of the Republic of Kenya. A Jubilee lawyer would be able to do this and tell us, you know, all these points of why the opposition is. But this is a government.
But he did not talk about the opposition. What he talked about was the guys talking about a situation where we might be going into a constitutional crisis as a country.
Right.
Yeah. And he came out expressly to say that there is no constitutional crisis,
yeah,
because being the Attorney General, yeah, he has to, because it's not about the party, this is about the country. Yeah? He has to speak about the issue of constitutional crisis. He has to speak on the issue of the law. Why are you smiling like that?
Marvin, to us,
Pura kabisa.
to us and Tasker,